Thank you. Thank you, Alice. I thought we would have run into each other um, again by now. We sure had a good time though. It was a couple years ago, I think, when we were together somewhere in Pennsylvania, I believe. But if I remember right, then we ran into you on the way home and had dinner together. So that was a cool experience. It was good to get to know you a little bit. And I love your enthusiasm for AA and I'm a big admirer of the Fellowship of the Spirit for that same thing, for the enthusiasm and the love for AA and spiritual growth and carrying this message. So it's an honor for me to be here. My name's Chad Payne. I'm sober since April the 2nd. Well, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Chad Payne. I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober since April the 2nd of 2003. And when I look around, I've scrolled through some of the faces and names on this meeting and realized that I'm a newcomer. So, and I'm okay with that. So it takes a little responsibility off of me. But anyway, just real quickly, I want to talk a little bit about my experience getting into the steps, and then with the 11th step, and then kind of talk about the way that I currently do this. But my experience was one of coming in pretty desperate, not really knowing what was wrong with me, and getting thrust into a lot of meetings. And the message that I picked up, I don't know if it's the message that they were sending, but the message that I picked up was the solution to alcoholism is going to AA meetings and being an AA member. And that's what I did. I was desperate at the time, and I certainly didn't want to go back to the life I'd been living. And the life I'd been living basically was that my drinking had gotten so bad that I had to quit. It got so bad that I had to quit, and that was my first surrender to alcohol. Was I had a bad wreck, and I got out of the hospital with a bunch of broken bones, and that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, or whatever, a long series of events. And I quit drinking, and I made it about 2 days. And after about 2 days, I was back to drinking, total loss of control, out all night, over and over, and homeless on crutches with my jaws wired shut and staples in my hip and a shoulder that wouldn't work right and things like that. And that began the quitting years. And I spent the next 2 or 3 years quitting. I quit a lot. I quit, every few days I would quit, and I would usually last anywhere from a few hours to a couple of days before I picked up again. So I came into AA pretty desperate and became an AA member, the best AA member that I could be, considering how sick I was in sobriety. Because what I found out is that that sobriety is not the answer to alcoholism. But what I was is I was a sober member of AA who was completely spiritually asleep and living 100% on what I think and what I feel like. And that's just about as dangerous as Chad living drunk. It's real close. And but I tell you what, I stayed sober for almost a year, and I put my heart and soul into being an AA member. I loved you guys. I wanted what you had. I showed up early. I stayed late. I cleaned up. I chaired meetings. I scrubbed out the ashtrays and set up the chairs and hung out with people after the meeting at the Waffle House. And I would I just did my best to go all in here. And that worked right up until it quit working. I reached a point where I didn't love you guys anymore. You guys were bugging me. And I was tired of hearing, like I'd hear the people that used to give me the relief where I could make it home and make it to bed and get up the next day and get through work and get back to a meeting without picking up a drink. Those people were bothering me now. Or maybe they weren't around anymore, or whatever it is, but I had made up my mind to leave AA. And and I was chairing a meeting one night, and a guy came in, and he was from out of town, and he had 15 years sober at the time, which seemed like a lifetime to me. I couldn't imagine somebody having 15 years sober, and he just seemed so wise. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll introduce him to a couple people and welcome him to our little clubhouse, and then go hang out with my friends. And that quickly turned into about a 2-hour conversation on the front steps of that clubhouse where he 12 stepped me. And he convinced me that I was in much worse shape than I thought that I was in. And he let me sit with that a while. And what I realized in that conversation was that I wasn't just leaving AA, but I was going to leave AA and drink. And that was not part of the plan. The plan was to leave AA and stay sober. But he helped me. He used his experience to explain alcoholism to me in a way that I could lay it up against my experience and see that I was going to leave AA and not stay sober. And he let me sit with that for a little bit. And then he said something to me that seemed so profound at the time. But he said, "You know, Chad, I think I know what you need." And I really wasn't liking this guy. I was wishing I'd never sat down with him. And I said, "What, Dave? What do I need?" And he said, "I think you need a spiritual awakening as a result of the 12 steps." And turns out he had probably said that to 100 guys before me and maybe 100 after me. But at the time, I thought, wow, and it's something seemed to click. And I went through the steps with him and had a pretty cool experience. And then I want to fast forward a few years down the road. I moved down to Austin, Texas. I was in Oklahoma at the time of that story, but I spent my first 5 years there, and I moved down to Austin, Texas in 2008. And I didn't want to go. It was part of the amends process to my daughter and my ex-wife. They moved down there, and I moved down there to kind of help raise her. And I was upset that I had to be there. And then next thing you know, I find myself sitting at a at a table on a Thursday night, and I've got my sponsor of 15 years until he died a couple years ago, Charlie, on one end of the table, and Mark Houston on the other end of the table, and Katie walking in after that Thursday night meeting and setting us all straight, and what I didn't know it at the time. I didn't want to be there at the time. Charlie kind of had to twist my arm to get me there, but I had no idea that I had been plopped right down in the middle of some of the most enthusiastic and best AA I've ever come across. And I know it was special because I'm certainly not in any way a circuit speaker, but I do get to travel around a little bit and talk to some people. And I've had people come to me and say, "My God, you were at that table. That's really something special." And I feel the same way. It was something special. And the reason I bring all that up is because I want to talk about some of the things that I learned when I got there, because up until that point, the 11th step, like many of the other steps, were just something that you did. You kind of phoned it in. It was a small part of a recovery program. And that's not the way that it was taught to me or presented to me when I got down there. And I remember Mark frequently talking about the strict spiritual disciplines of steps 10 and 11. And I know this it's kind of becoming a common theme in this talk so far, but he bugged me too. He seemed to be able to see right through me. I'm a guy who's worked my butt off for 22 years in AA to get accolades, and I'm very much aware that that is not any part of the solution to alcoholism. And I'm not near as bad about it today as I used to be at different times in my recovery. But Mark saw right through all of it, and he gave me no special treatment, and he didn't seem to even like me, but I picked up like a sense of love there. There was a sense of love, not because I'm Chad Payne, but because I'm an alcoholic seeking God in recovery. And he seemed to see right through me, and he said things that just went against what I thought I knew. You guys ever have anybody in your life like that? They're saying things that just go against what you think you already know, and the ego's saying, "No, that's not the way I learned it." But then there's something else in there. Something's hitting you in a place where it's like, I want to hear more about this. And that's how it was with him. And then Charlie and Katie would drill us all on pages 60 to 63 and the failure of self-will and how important that is to a program of recovery. And it totally revamped the way that I see this thing. And when Mark would talk about these strict spiritual disciplines, he would talk about this as something, not just something to do because it's what I have to do if I want to stay sober. He would talk about, what can I do to get more God? Like with an enthusiasm that I had never seen. Why would I spend 5 minutes in the morning while my car's warming up with God if I'm going to claim that's the most important relationship in my life? Why wouldn't I devote some real time and energy and effort to this? and that's something that I hadn't done. And I can tell you that I had a lot of ego involved in that time, and I realized that sitting at that table, that all that I had done for the 5 years leading up to this didn't amount to much. And I wanted to be one of those guys. So I started doing this on a deeper level. I started practicing 10 and 11 on a much deeper level, a much more consistent and thorough level. And then I started going out to carry the message in a much more active way. And a lot of that was driven by ego because I wanted to be somebody. And that didn't last, but thankfully I was surrounded by people who would help me through that process and move from being ego driven to being driven by a true desire to develop a relationship with God and to help people. And that's what happened. And they walked me through that and stayed with me and let me go through those growing pains and come out the other side with a new motive and new inspiration. So, so I went to work on it. I started reading about how to do this more effectively. I started reading these pages 84 to 88 on a regular basis, and really trying to practice this stuff and adding things into it, and talking to people about it, and spending more time on it. I remember at one point, I had to go buy an alarm clock to put on my dresser. So my phone alarm would go off, and I would set it about 15 minutes early so I could get in a couple of snoozes. But then the alarm clock on the dresser would go off, and the deal was when that one goes off, I have to go turn it off and then go straight to a cold shower. And then I would take a cold shower, and then I would come out and pray and meditate. And guys, don't worry, cold showers in Texas aren't that cold. So, you know, but that's what I had to do, because what I was told is that if you want a relationship with God, get your butt out of bed in the morning and develop one. If you want the gifts of carrying this message, get your butt over to the institutions and the beginners meetings and the clubhouses, the place where you can find the alcoholics and find people to work with. I was told, get out there and get it done. If that's what you want to do, you got to make it happen. Nobody can do it for you. And up until that point, my attitude had been much more one of let's just show up and do what we're supposed to do so we can stay sober and be a member in good standing. So anyway, I want to talk about just a couple of things here that it says in the book, and I chose that line. It says it works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. And I've learned so much, and some of the people that I've learned from are in this room right now. And I've learned so much from people that I've never even met. Because of listening to people on tape and listening to somebody who said something that somebody else said that I never heard them say it, that kind of thing. And I have teachers in AA, and sometimes I'll hear a speaker say, we don't have teachers and we don't have experts. And it's kind of funny to me, because then they'll turn around, a little while later and say, but I've got to remain teachable. And I'm like, why? But I understand what they're saying. Claiming that I'm a teacher or an expert is a slippery slope for an alcoholic like me. But I do understand today that I've been taught a lot by a lot of people who have become, in my opinion, experts at some of this stuff. I mean, if you've, for the last 15 years, have done 5,000 nightly reviews or sat in prayer and meditation 5,000 mornings, then you're kind of an expert on this. And I've learned from some people who have that kind of experience, and I love to hear that. And it says if we have the proper attitude and work at it, and to me, what that's saying, it's about attitude and practice. I could never learn to hit a golf ball if I just walked up and said, this is stupid. I'm never going to be able to do this. And it's funny, because that's how I come into the 11th step. I say, I don't meditate because I'm just really not good at it. Which alcoholic started out good at meditation? I haven't met that guy yet. Yeah, and the point is, do what you're not good at if you want to get results. I like to work out, and I do all kinds of different things to work out, some weightlifting and some running and some yoga and hiking and all these different things. But like, where I've gotten the most results is when I've made a commitment to learn how to do what I'm not good at. And that's certainly true for me with some of our principles of self-examination, prayer, meditation. And one of my favorite quotes comes out of the 12 and 12, and it's on I believe it's on page 98 in the 12 and 12, and it says there's a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit, but when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. And I want that. I want an unshakable foundation for life because I'm a guy that's had a very shaky foundation for life for many years before sobriety and in sobriety. And that's what really drove me to have this practice was that shaky foundation that I lived with for so long in sobriety. So to have an unshakable foundation for life, that's good news. And how do you do that? It's this logically related and interwoven practice of self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Another thing that I just read the other night, and this is, I'll talk about him some more in a minute, but Father Bill has this new book on the power of two-way prayer. And he says something interesting here, and this comes from an interview that in 1937, J.D. Rockefeller Jr. sent his assistant Frank Amos to discover why Bill and Dr. Bob's approach to changing alcoholics when so many other attempts had failed. Amos's report includes this. The AA members of that time did not consider meetings necessary to maintain sobriety. Boy, that just shoots an old idea down for me. Um, it says they were simply desirable. Morning devotion and quiet time, however, were musts. And that's interesting to me. And guys, I go to 4 meetings a week. I love AA meetings, but and certainly I don't want anybody to get the idea that I don't know that I could ever continue to do this on a regular basis without regular contact with you guys and finding opportunities to connect and be of service on a spiritual level, right smack dab in the middle of AA meetings. But I love that quote because it emphasizes the importance of this step and how it's considered a must, from the early days. So the definition of meditate is interesting to me. And I'm kind of a big book nerd, and I don't just want to know what a word in the book means. I want to know what it meant at the time they were writing the book. So I've got a 1936 Webster's Dictionary, and I look up the word meditate. And some of these words are a little different. And this one's a little different because the meaning of the word meditate in our society kind of changed with the Eastern influence in the 60s. But before that, it meant something a little different. Now, here's what it said in that old dictionary. The first definition for meditate is to contemplate. The second definition is to intend or plan. The third definition is to dwell in thought or reflect. And then there's a synonym that says to consider. And then actually sponsor a guy who lives in a monastery, and he told me he spends 2 hours a night in prayer. And I said, buddy, what does that look like? And he explained it to me, he described it to me, and I thought, that sounds a lot like meditation. And it can mean a lot of different things. And I've often heard it said that prayer is talking to God and meditation's listening. And I love a simple definition like that. But I think this takes it a little bit deeper and says there's all different kinds. So let's look at some of this because the book says definite and valuable suggestions. It would be easy to be vague about this matter. But man, we've been doing a lot of this, so we think we can make some really definite and valuable suggestions. So this first form that it gives me, this first form of meditation is a reflection. So what it's asking me to do, and this is what I do. I sit down at night and I've got a little composition book right here behind me, and I open it up and I do a reflection on the day. And the first thing I take a look at is what's been blocking me throughout the day. Is it resentment? Is it fear? Is it self-pity? Is it self-obsession? Is it I've got certain character defects from the last time I wrote inventory that I'm looking for in that review. Right now, I'll just tell you what they are. They're avoidance, procrastination, being overwhelmed, seeking distraction. That's a really cool way of saying scrolling through my phone when I have other stuff to do. So I've got certain character defects that I'm looking for based on my current experience, and these are the things that are blocking me from God. These character defects are the walls that protect me, the tools that I use to manage my life, and what happens in that process is I shut God out of my life when I'm doing those things. And I take a look at this stuff, and my experience with this is that this self-examination piece is so important for me that I would place it in front of the prayer and meditation that I would do in the morning. And here's why. If I'm blocked, what happens for me is reading a book, a spiritual book, or sitting in meditation or saying a prayer can become an intellectual exercise because I'm spiritually asleep. And all I'm running on is my thinking or how I feel. Spirits sound asleep. And as Mark would say, I'm walking around sleeping, dreaming I'm awake. And I'm praying and I'm meditating, but I'm blocked. So that's what I do. I think this review is very important. And in my experience, what happens is I'm by nature, I'm agnostic, I'm atheist. And when go sound asleep spiritually, that comes back because my mind still can't comprehend God. And when I go to sleep spiritually, my mind says, come on, Chad, we know there's no God. I mean, really? And if I'm left to that for very long, I'm not going to continue this practice. So in order for me to stay spiritually awake, I've got to get free of self because in my experience, as self goes down, God consciousness goes up. And that's why a guy like me who's agnostic or atheist can come in here and work the steps, not because he believes in God, but because he believes in the power of alcoholism. And I can work these steps and I can have an experience with a God I don't even believe in. And that's the gift to me of the 12 steps, to be able to have an experience with a God that I may or may not even believe in. And that's what happened for me. So when I sit down with this and I do this reflection, I'm looking at what it is here that's blocking me. And a lot of the guys in my sponsorship, my current sponsorship lineage, they share this thing with each other. And for me personally, I like for this review to be something that's just between me and God because I told you guys, I'm just 22 years sober. I'm a newcomer here. And sometimes when I write this stuff down, if I know somebody else is going to read it, I write it differently. Just being honest, that's just my experience, maybe not anyone else's. And so when I write this stuff down, it's strictly between me and God. And then I look at a couple of things. Now I got some action I'm going to take. And the action is number one, is there something I need to talk to my sponsor about? Number two, is there somewhere I owe amends? And then the third piece of this, and what that actually is that's really where I fell short on the 10th step throughout the day. And guys, I've been practicing 10th step for a long time, and I'll tell you what happens for me. Some days I forget. Some days I sit down and I do this review and I go, dang, I forgot about the 10th step all day long. I didn't watch for 1 minute. Where was I? I don't even know. I was at work. I was carrying the message. I was in my home group, business meeting. I was with my family, all this stuff. And I totally forgot I was an alcoholic. And I forgot about God. How'd that happen? And it happens for me sometimes. So I'm so grateful that I've got this 11th step to bring me back on the beam at least twice a day, at least twice a day. And I've got to stay consistent with it for that purpose. And then this powerful piece, the third piece to me of this review is corrective measures. And I use two-way prayer here, and I believe that's another form of meditation, is to ask. So what I do in that time is I ask God, I say, okay, God, what corrective measures can I take? How can I see this differently? And then I start writing, and I write as if God's writing to me. Sometimes I even use my name, Chad, comma, da 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 da, and God's and a lot of times I got to kickstart it to get it going. I can tell this one's coming, but then as I start writing, what happens is there's a shift that takes place, and then next thing you know, I look down and I say, "Wow, where'd that come from?" That doesn't happen every time, but it happens sometimes, and I don't want to miss it if I've ever got a chance for it because that's powerful, you know. Um, Wake up in the morning. Another form of meditation is plan the day. So what I do today, the way that I see this is he's got a prayer here. Ask God to direct our thinking. What I do today is I sit in a meditation, and this is weird, but I'm just going to tell you anyway, because I'm a weird guy. So here's the weirdness. The first thing I do is I sit in a meditation to clear the energy centers. I don't know if any of you have ever gotten into like chakras or energy centers or whatever, that kind. I'm not sure. Is this California AA or I don't know. Anyway, I guess it's all over the world, but we're clear. So these lower energy centers, the first three energy centers, that's where resentment, fear, and shame and all those other things live. These old ideas, these things that block me, that block this flow of spiritual energy, this flow of God consciousness. They live down there, and I do a little meditation to try to clear those energy centers. And then I start having a conversation with God how what we're gonna do today to plan this day. And when I'm doing that, two things come up. They're mentioned right here in the big book. Indecision. I don't know what to do. So here I can go again into two-way prayer and ask God for direction. Sometimes I get an answer if I write it down and let God write back to me, but I don't always get it that way. Sometimes I've got to be moving my feet throughout the day and then it becomes clear. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes somebody says something to me. Here's a really interesting one. Sometimes somebody will say something to me and I'll realize, oh, wow, that's the message God was going to send to me. And then every now and then I'll say something to a sponsee or someone I'm carrying the message to, and I'll think, I don't know where that came from. I don't know if he even heard it, but it's exactly what I needed to hear. So I've got to make sure that I'm available and doing those things so God can do a little work on me. The other thing that I might face is problems. It says, ask that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. Often I know what problems are coming. Maybe I'm picking my kid up from the ex-wife today. Maybe I'm having to sit down with my boss today or an employee. Maybe the business meeting is tonight at my home group. Oh boy. And because I've practiced this on a regular basis, I know what character defects show up. So now I'm going to get into some prayer. And a really powerful form of meditation that I like to do right here is called visualization. So maybe I actually sit and close my eyes for a minute and picture picking my kid up from my ex-wife and how I think God would have me show up and visualize that. This is the man that I think God would have me be in this moment. And it's not a strange concept. I mean, basketball players visualize the free throw going in before they shoot. Golfers visualize the ball landing on the green before they hit it. It's a great practice. And then it goes on down here to talk about what else we can do. And one of the things that I love about Bill's writing of the 11th step is he made it a doorway into whatever you want to do. First time I read a book, I went to church and I'm sitting in church, new in recovery, and I thought, wow, I think the pastor must be in AA. And then I'm in a Buddhist meditation class and I'm like, wow, I think Bill Wilson must have been a Buddhist. This stuff fits so well into every other spiritual path. And I, like I told you guys, I came in here a staunch atheist, agnostic. I don't know. Had no interest in God. And today I love the pursuit of spiritual practice, love the pursuit of God. I love this stuff. It's a big adventure. I've been to Bible studies, meditation classes, Native American pipe ceremonies, sweat lodges. I've sit in a kirtan, a circle of people chanting Hare Krishna and thought, my God, if my dad could see me now, wow. And I mean, but I've been to group therapy, did 2 years of group therapy. And because I did that in addition to AA, it worked. It worked. And that's what I found with all these other spiritual practices is if I do them in addition to the 12 steps, not instead of, they are very effective. Very effective. And when I switch that around and do it instead of, that's when we get in some trouble. And that's when you hear the guy in the meeting saying church doesn't work for an alcoholic. It's like it darn sure does work if you do it in addition to the 12 steps, just like therapy and just like a lot of other stuff. So anyway, I'm getting a little opinionated there. I better back it down. There's another thing here I want to talk about. the gift of pause. It tells me to pause throughout the day when I find myself a little agitated, starting to get a little doubtful. And the only thing I want to say about that, I was taught this and then I started to see it over and over in my experience. It's a gift. It's a promise. And for me, it ain't happening if I'm not consistent with 10 and 11. There is no pause. But if I'm consistent with 10 and 11, I get a little pause. Now, if I do what I'm supposed to do with it, still up to me. I don't automatically do what I'm supposed to do with the pause, but I do get a second to respond rather than feel, react, think, react the way I'd been doing it all along. 5 minutes. Got it. Thank you. So it goes on down here to give me some of these. Before I get into that, I just love this line. It tells me to constantly remind myself I'm no longer running the show. I think constantly means all the time. That's a tall order. You ever hear somebody say, I follow all the instructions in this big book? I'm like, no, you don't. You don't follow that one. Constantly remind yourself you're no longer running the show. Really? How about this one? If that's not enough for you, if we turn back a couple pages, it says, how can I best serve God? Thy will not mine be done. These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. Oh, okay. Back on page 20, here's another one. On page 20, it says, my very life as an ex-problem drinker depends upon constant thought of others and how I can help meet their needs. You know what I think about constantly? Me. No, 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 that's not true. I think about you sometimes if what you're doing is affecting me. The goal here is to constantly be saying, I'm not running the show. How can I best serve God? And how can I help others? That's the goal. And I don't know about you guys, but in order for me to have a 1 in a million chance of living in that place, I've got to get clear in 4 through 9, and I've got to consistently and thoroughly practice 10 and 11, and I got to get my butt out there and help others. That's the only way I can get anywhere near living a life like constantly. Constantly to me is one of the most powerful words in this big book. It gives me some promises here. And this word excitement, just to throw this in for no good reason, excitement in the old dictionary says agitation. I think that the meaning of that word's changed a little bit, but it says we're in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions if we're doing this step. We become much more efficient and we don't tire so easily. We're not burning up energy foolishly. The human brain's about 8% of the mass of the human body on average, but it burns about 25% of the energy, maybe 35% in a state of high stress. When I'm in full-blown self-will, I think it burns about 50% of my energy because I'm a thinker. And when I'm in self-will, what I could easily say all the time is just give me a minute, I got to think. I just need to think. And those thoughts all burn energy. And guys, the way it works for me is when I'm living in self-will, on one end of the spectrum, I burn it to the ground. On the other end, I do okay. It's usually somewhere in between, but on the end where I do okay, I'm exhausted and I'm stressed out because I've been thinking my way through life and I've given my mind way too difficult of a job. It was never designed to manage my life in a way where I never have to experience any inconvenience or discomfort. And that's the job I gave it, and it's struggling. And it wakes me up in the middle of the night trying to figure it out. I'm like, mind, go, let's go to sleep. The mind's going, look, you gave me the job. I'm just trying to do it. And that's not my mind's job. My mind's job is it's a simple situational problem solver. Okay, so it says it works. It really does. And back on page 62, it tells me I got to quit playing God. You know why? It didn't work. And right here it says it works. It really does. So we found something, the proper use of the will to live in steps 10 and 11, to get clear in 4 through 9 and live in 10 and 11. Instead of trying to get hit with a problem and trying to fix it out here, how about getting hit with the problem and going within and accessing God? Getting free of the fear, getting free of the resentment, getting in touch with God, and then dealing with the situation out here. It's a new way of life. So the last thing I want to say is this. Why do I even do this? Why do we do this? Guys, to be 100% honest with you, sometimes I do it so I feel better, but that's not the purpose and it's not that effective that way. When I do this with the intention of using an awakened spirit to go be of service, it's unbelievable how well it works. And the way I see this program today is steps 1 through 11 ain't working the steps. That's taken some spiritual action to put me in a position to do the work. The work is carrying this message and working with others. And when I take steps 1 through 11, I can do that in a state of surrender. And in a state of surrender, God can work through me to help somebody else instead of me doing it all on my own power. That's a dangerous place to be. And there's no better place for an alcoholic to be than in a state of surrender where God's using me to help somebody else. And that's why we do what we do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Alice. I appreciate you. My name is Marilyn. I'm an alcoholic. I got the same thing, to fit myself to be of maximum service. But I just want to tell you, thank you, first of all, Chad. Did I say I'm an alcoholic? I am. I want to tell you, thank you, Chad. That was a powerful message on step 11. It works, it really does. And you really delivered it. I can't wait to get this recording. But I'm going to ask you one question because I want to get a little more out of you on that visualization piece, right? Because, and I totally agree with you on that. We used to do that like in school, I had to do a speech or a debate or something like that. I would practice that visualization. But on the spiritual level, can you give me a little more on how you guide yourself into that practice? What
Sure.
precedes? Mhm.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you current experience with it right now. Like I say, right now, what I've done now is I've I went back to college when I was in early sobriety, and or I went to college in early sobriety, and uh, I was able to go to class well because AA taught me how to show up and be where I say I'm going to be, show up early and participate. So I did that well. And then I'd go home with homework and never do it. So I just kind of gave up on that part of it, and I would just go to class and pay attention and take the test, and I made it through. Well, now I'm doing an online master's program, and it's all homework. And it's a huge struggle for me, and I didn't think it would be this bad, and so I'm really struggling. I get overwhelmed with what I got to do, and I don't know how to do it. And then when I get overwhelmed, that's fear. And the way I react sometimes in fear is I run away. And the way that I run away is I seek out distraction. So I have had to delete Instagram, Facebook, YouTube off my phone. I can still get to it, but at least that gives me a second, I've had to do some things. So back to your question, what I would do then is I would set an intention. I would set an intent with God on how I want to show up here, and it kind of like a sane and sound ideal with a little plan of action on sitting down and working on this for a certain amount of time and then taking a little exercise break and then sitting back down. And then what I would do then is in prayer and meditation in the morning, read through that and then sit for just a couple of minutes and visualize me actually doing that. Visualize me doing that and then try to experience how it feels when I pull it off, to feel that sense of accomplishment. So I'm setting a clear intention with the mind and then feeling it. And what I've heard in setting an intention through prayer is that the mind gives you the direction, and that the emotions give you the power. I don't look at it that way. Whenever I hear the word power, I'm thinking it comes from God. But still, I kind of like that idea to get a little propulsion from the emotions. So what I try to do is I try to sit and visualize not only what it would look like to be the man I think God would have me be in that moment and show up that way and act in principle, and also feel what it would feel like to do that. And I'm not that great at it, but I try to do it for a couple of minutes and then move on.
Mhm. Thank you, Marilyn, for the question in chat. What a great answer. Selena, you're up next.
I'm Selena, I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Chad. There's almost nothing to say after that. But you talked about a lot about your like the ego, and you talked about the solution as far as getting into prayer and meditation. My question is, what does Chad look like when he's not in prayer and meditation? What does Chad look like? What is Chad saying? If I see you somewhere, it's like what am I getting back from you when you're not close to God or seeking God
Mm,
and not in ego or in the ego?
mm. Well, thanks for the simple question there, Selena. That's a great question. And I'm very familiar with what I look like when I am not consciously connected with God. I was talking to a woman I deeply respect and admire one time, and she I said something about being more connected to God, and she said, Chad, you have a serious misunderstanding of your connection to God. She said, I think the example that she used, she said, when you were stealing your grandma's stuff while she was in the hospital recovering from a stroke, you were just as connected to God as you are when you're sitting down with a newcomer. You just didn't know it. You just weren't aware of it. So what I understand today is that I don't exist without a connection to God. I'm always 100% connected to God. The question is, am I aware of it and am I acting like it? But when I'm not conscious of that connection, when I'm spiritually asleep or I'm asleep to spirit, the way that I show up is I have a real hard time smiling. I'm really irritable. I shut down. I judge people very harshly. I judge myself very harshly. There's a voice in my head that's telling me that I'm not good enough, that I don't measure up, that I always fall short, and that I'll never be good enough. I get frustrated easily when something doesn't work my way. I'm the guy that kicks something or yells some very offensive curse words, and I'm not pleasant to be around. And my girlfriend, she's out talking at another meeting tonight, and she would very much verify that. And she's always happy to tell somebody, here's what Chad looks like when he's not talking when he's not talking at a meeting or something. So anyway, that drives me. But I'll tell you, I got to remember a couple things, and I'm actually going back through the steps right now, and I just had a pretty disturbing experience with step one again. And what I usually realize is that somewhere along the way, I've forgotten one of the main reasons that I do this is because a drink is around the corner for a guy like me if I don't continue to seek God. And then the another reason that I do it is because I love the way that I experience life when I am conscious of that connection. But also another thing that drives me to do this work is that I don't want to be that miserable guy. We joke. I go spend time with my dad, and my dad comes off sometimes as just kind of a guy who's sad. He just seems to be kind of sad, and we joke about it. Julie will send me a text, and I just say, "What are you doing? Being sads with Dad?" I'm like, yeah, we've been sitting, we've been sitting around being sad, being quiet and sad. So when the book says we're not a glum lot, I'm like, I am. I'm a glum lot unless I'm serious. So the way it was taught to me, and I take this thing real, real seriously. I'm a can be accused of being kind of a over the top big book thumper kind of guy, and hopefully I've kind of transcended that over the years. I'd like to think that I have, or kind of gotten past it. But what I was taught and what I try to practice is that I take my recovery very seriously because I don't want to take my life seriously. That's no way to live. And when I take my recovery seriously, then I can wear life much more loosely. So anyway, thanks, Selena.
Great question. James, my friend, come on in.
Hey family, Jamie C., grateful recovered member of this program, Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's thanks to God and very strong sponsorship I got to wake up this morning and not come to, and for that I'm forever grateful. I want to thank the Fellowship of the Spirit team. Thank you for putting on this amazing meeting and keeping this room safe. And Chad, man, you did not disappoint. And, as I'm sitting here listening to your share, I'm pondering a lot of things. You know, I have a statement and then a little bit of a question. As you're practicing steps 10 and 11, 11 more so, and I believe that those steps, by and large, are very metaphysical in their nature. Do you think that living or entering into the world of the spirit and participating in the world of the spirit is what Bill Wilson was talking about when he said that he'd been rocketed into the fourth dimension, by just being present in the moment, not placing judgment on the experience, just allowing it to come to you. What's your experience with that as you do your as you continue to take personal inventory, and as you sit down when you retire at night, and then even on awakening when you consider your plans for the day and you're accessing God in the now? What does that look like for you, and what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Jamie, I love your enthusiasm, and that's a great question, and I'm waiting for the easy question. You know, you guys are hitting me pretty hard here, but that's a darn good one. In the fourth dimension, I it's funny. I just heard JS out of Arizona say I'm from Sedona, where we live in the fourth dimension. Visit the fifth and entertain those of you who live in the third. I thought that's a pretty good way to introduce it, you know. But to me, it's another way of talking about this vital sixth sense, this world of the spirit, the fourth dimension. And what happens is I wake up to a whole nother plane of existence, and it happens to be the plane of existence that governs the three-dimensional world. And I like to look at that. I think a great description of that is on page 61 in the big book, where it says, I'm a victim of the delusion. I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I manage well. What world is this world? I think that's the 3D world. The 3D world. I'm a victim of the delusion that I can find happiness and satisfaction in the 3D world. That's a delusion. How do I find happiness in the 3D world? Money, reputation, the right relationship, whatever, the right career, whatever it may be, all those things that I spend so much time. That's where I think that's where my mind looks for satisfaction and happiness. And what the book is trying to open my eyes to, or open me up this sixth sense to help me to see on a spiritual level, is that there's something more going on here. There's more than this physical body. There's an energetic body. There's a spirit that this that is manifest this body. There's a spirit that was here before this body was born, and will be here after this body dies, and it's just trying to wake me. When I realize that, then everything in this 3D world, what happens for me is that it's not a big deal. And if it's not a big deal, the future's not a big deal. What happened in the past is not a big deal. I just really often picture myself when I leave this body looking back with the clarity, without being fettered by this mind, or this obsessive mind, or this fragile body, looking back and going, wow, it was all okay the whole time. And that's what I want to get in touch with on a daily basis as best I can. And some days are much better than others, you know. But I've just had a few glimpses here and there of what that's like. And to live in that place. What happened for me when I had a really powerful experience at a meditation retreat a couple years ago, and I won't tell the whole story, but one of the experiences that I had is I experienced something called wholeness, and I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know what it was. And the way that I see this now is in those few days where I was experiencing wholeness, what I knew on a deep level is that I didn't need anything. I already had everything I need. And the interesting thing that happened is, first my mind slowed way down. And then my mind started to think of how I could help. And I came up with some cool ideas on things to do with sponsees, and some of that kind of stuff. And a lot of it was geared toward AA, and it's stuff that I'm still doing today. But in that moment, I was inspired, and it's because the mind didn't have to think about me all the time, and it was opened up and given the opportunity to do something else, and to actually be inspired. So that's just a short description of what the way that I see that and what that's kind of like for me. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Jamie, for the question. Andrew, I'm in trouble now, but please come on in. We're going to run a little over, but please do come in.
Good evening, beautiful souls all. Thank you, FOTS team. A quick question, Mr. Chad. The spiritual life is not a theory. And you mentioned something Mark Houston said we've been walking around asleep. When did you realize that spiritual life is reality?
Mm, wow. When did I realize the spiritual life is reality? That's not a one-time event for me. That's a great question too. Um, that's not a one-time event for me. That's something that's grown. That's that experience that I had just a couple of years ago, grew it to a new level. It's something else that I also experienced through getting real active carrying the message when I moved down to Austin. It's something else that I experienced going through the steps the first time. I'll tell you a big awakening that I had the first time I went through the steps is that I could admit things that I considered so embarrassing before. And I realized that, and I had so much more acceptance of self. And even looking back on it, it wasn't much, but it was a lot more than I ever had. So I've had little bits and pieces of things throughout the last 20, I would say probably 20, 21 years. Getting into the steps and getting through the steps was a slow process for me in the beginning, but I've had some of those little things, and what's happened is it's awakened me to something, a deep knowing of something that I didn't know before, or something that was just theory. And to realize that on a deeper level. And I'll tell you one thing that's really hit me a lot today that's really I'm considering a great gift is I'm watching people around me and I'm seeing people as being like me, all doing the best that we can in this given moment with whatever it is that we have. And I've heard that for years and years in recovery in the rooms, but I've experienced it lately to be able to honestly look at somebody or to even look at myself and just go, that's all right, bud, we're all doing the best we can. And I'm going to do my best to love you anyway. And it's actually harder for me to say that to myself than it is for me to say that to somebody else. That's just me. That's not everybody's case, but that's been a huge thing. So I guess the best way I can answer that, Andrew, is it's in little bits and pieces of kind of new realizations or knowings that come in a deeper level than intellectually. And before I'm done here, I want to tell you guys always thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for letting me get to be here and be with you guys. What a powerful room full of people.
Chad, thank you for saying yes, my friend. I hope that I get to see you again on the broad highway. John, back to you.